23 degrees here at West Bremer Radio at 8:14. Let's cross down live.
Yes.
To Harold H. P. Cock-a-doodle-doo.
Well, that was almost in sync.
Harold Peacock. He's going to tell us about the unusual Ipswich court appearances of the 1860s, including that of a postman, Joseph Cook. G'day, Harold.
Yeah, good morning, Danny. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things happen in Ipswich over the years. And so a rainy weekend like this is perfect for sitting in a library and reading about this stuff.
Yeah, so Joseph Cook, he was the postman.
Look, he was. And look, during my constant research into Ipswich history, I did come across some really interesting things that just aren't big enough to make a whole story for you. So I'll put them all together here, and part of that's Joseph. So I'll get into that now for you.
Yeah, go for it, young man.
Yeah, look, I guess generally, do you ever think that some of the roads are really bad today? Well, in 1861, Bell Street in Ipswich was so bad that even Mr. Peter Slee was forced to drive his team of bullocks around the road along the footpath in order to get along it. Now, for illegally using the footpath, Slee was summoned to court and fined 10 shillings.
Oh.
So the roads were even worse back then if bullocks couldn't get through. Then there was Mr. Edward Edwards. Now, the Edwards, last named Unjust, he once had 8 gold sovereigns stolen from him. Then his wife deserted him, forcing him to advertise to all and sundry that he wouldn't be responsible for her debts. So it was perhaps with a touch of satisfaction that he went to the Ipswich courthouse in 1861. He was charged with refusing to register a dog. Now, Mr. Edwards sat quietly as evidence was provided as to the aggressive nature of the dog in question. When asked to defend himself before the inevitable fine was handed down, Mr. Edwards stated that the dog was incapable of harming anything. In fact, it had been shot a few days earlier. So the bench agreed that the dog could no longer do any harm, and so dismissed the case. I told you, there's heaps of interesting stuff happens in Ipswich Courthouse. Now, also in 1861, there was a rash of £3 fines for people who didn't turn up for jury service. And that's no trifling sum, Danny, because that's over $3,000 today. Now, Mr. John Hardy was one of those who got fined. Hardy was a joint proprietor of the Fassifern Run and would later be horsewhipped on the corner of Brisbane and East Streets in Ipswich.
Horsewhipped?
Yeah, and with a big whip, a horsewhip on him. Now, the whipper who did the whipping, he was provoked because Hardy was having an affair with the whipper's sister-in-law. So, you could say... And
did they use the whip? They would have used that whip to whip.
Yeah, well, look, that's in the next week's story. I can go into a bit further. But right now, there's someone else who got fined for didn't turn up for jury service, got fined £3, and that was Mr. William Hendren. Now, Hendren was a stock and station agent and was secretary of the trustees of the Ipswich Cemetery. Now, he would be elected to the Queensland Legislative Assembly representing Bundamba. But after the election, he was summoned to court after failing to pay for refreshments that he got during the election campaign. So, Danny, politicians out there, you better pay up or you'll be in court.
Yeah, just amazing how you filter this information and get it. Yeah. But Ipswich is a very old city, isn't it?
There is. And like Mr. Patrick Carroll's another one from way back then in 1861. So it is old. And he was another one that got fined £3 for not turning up for the jury. Although, ironically, he was no stranger to the courthouse. You see, despite being convicted there for public inebriation, he became the clerk of petty sessions.
Right.
And Carroll came to a sticky end, though, when crossing the railway line at Bundamba Station and was run over by a train. And his wife then checked into the Woogaroo Lunatic Asylum. Now, finally, I'll come to the Ipswich postman that you wanted to know about.
Yes.
It was in the 1860s, Mr. Joseph Cook had the mail contract for the Ipswich to Toowoomba service, for which he was paid the handsome sum of £400 a year. That's over $400,000.
Wow.
Now, embarrassingly, he was called to the Ipswich courthouse and fined for forgetting to get a licence for his coach. Now, one time he was driving along Business Street in Ipswich, past West Street, and was pretty much in front of where the West Bremer radio studios are now.
Really?
When the front wheel of this coach came off. Mm-hmm. Now, the result was that Mr. Cook was thrown out and dragged a fair way along the road right in front of West Bremer radio before the horses could be stopped. Mm. But Mr. Cook's most unusual incident was one that didn't end up in the Ipswich courthouse, but perhaps it should have. Mm. You see, in 1862, there was a narrow escape when the coach had just crossed the 7 Mile Creek Bridge at Rosewood. Mm. That's when the horses began to kick and tried to bolt into the bush, but they were brought under control thanks to the good management of the driver, Joseph Cook. Mm. Now, there were several passengers in the coach at the time, and one older gentleman was pitched against 2 young women seated opposite. He quite enjoyed the experience. Now, Joseph Cook received a kick on the knee, but nothing happened to the older gentleman. And I'm pretty sure if he tried that today with young ladies, he would definitely end up in court.
Yes.
So that's a few interesting things that happened in the Ipswich courthouse, but they're all little stories, but gee, the history of Ipswich is interesting overall, isn't it?
Well, for little things, you got tough penalties. Today they do tough, no penalties for big things. Sad.
It is, but you got to turn up to jury service, and politicians pay your bills after the election campaign. That's an important one even today.
There he is, Harold the H.
Hi. Oh. Hi.
P. Cock-a-doodle-doo was another great story. Where do we find this story? I just noticed you got one there about your grandmother and your grandfather burying stuff too.
Yeah, look, this comes back to the metal detecting that people always ask me about too. Because I can come out and metal detect around old houses for you and look for that treasure that your grandma and grandpa buried, because there's actually just someone over in Europe found about $100 million worth of gold coins that was buried for safety during the war, Second World War. So, hey, if anyone wants to come out and check out their old backyard, just let me know.
And they just go on Facebook to ask you, what's your Facebook?
Yeah, look, you go to on Facebook or Instagram, any of the socials, History Out There, or go online to the website, historyouthere.com.
There he is, the man that's got all the history of Ipswich. He's the great researcher.
He is.
He's a great storyteller.
He is.
His name is Harold the H. P. Cock-a-doodle-doo. Harold Peacock. There he is at 8:21 on West Bremer Radio.